Well, Jay Bryan can't be with us this week, but we're joined by the other half of our dynamic duo, Colin Read, who is the chair of the Department of Economics and Finance at SUNY Plattsburgh and a Clayton County legislator. Joins us. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
We'll get to the president and governor's budgets in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at Wall Street this week. A lot of people excited by what the oil's been doing, up about 15% since the end of last week, and we're taping midweek now, but is this oil hitting rock bottom and starting to work its way back up? You hear from different analysts, some that think, okay, it's going to hover here for a while. Others thinking that that with supply and demand that the oil industry may be reacting, and this may be the beginning of our prices at the pump going up as oil prices go up.
That's right. It's just only 1 month ago that we were lamenting that all this volatility in the oil industry really can be kind of destabilizing. Mm-hmm. And at that time, we talked a little bit about the very strange supply dynamics in the industry, and that when the price goes down low enough, it starts cutting out whole swaths of that industry. In this case, it's usually the fracking industry, which is relatively large in the United States, but relatively high producers. You know, their cutoff is $50 to $60. Push it below there, and they certainly aren't going to be drilling any more wells. And because these wells are relatively small, they don't last the 10 or 20 years like a big Alaska field would last. You know, if you don't have a constant freshening up of those new fracking facilities, you see quite a strong supply response. I think we're starting to see that already.
So they curtail production, in some cases may even shut wells down, probably aren't drilling new ones at this point, or maybe holding off until they see the price rebound some.
Correct, and the oil services companies that handle that sector have been laying off oil workers left, right, and center over the last month.
We heard from a former president of Shell Oil, was on CNBC this week talking about all this and saying that because the industry knows supply and demand so well, and as they scale back, that that's going to eat up what extra supply there is out there. And he was predicting that you were going to see maybe prices back up to $70, $80 a barrel by the end of the year, which would probably drive our gas prices back up in the range where we were used to for so long, $3 pushing $4.
That's right. And of course, we're not going to quite see the same kind of price response because our prices in this market here have more markups, less competitive market, more taxes, et cetera. Right. So we might
we
go up.
We haven't seen the $2 a gallon price that so many states have seen.
Right. So we may go up from, say, $2.70 to $3.20, but other markets might see it go up from $1.90 to $2.40. It seems like a lot bigger proportional increase to them.
The Loonie has really been dropping off in recent months, even par for quite a while, but for the past year and a half, we've seen it start to decline, and now back down, dipping below 80 cents to the dollar, 79 cents, I think, back up to 80 this week. So with about a 20% exchange rate, what impact does that have on us here on this side of the border? Does it really slow down the flow of Canadians that have that money and that exchange rate? Does that make them think twice about coming down here to go shopping?
I think it does. I think that 70s point is the magical number. I think we didn't see a large change in, for instance, sales tax revenues when it went down to 85 or so. Although the sales tax revenues aren't growing nearly quite so quickly as they were just a couple of years ago. But something about that 7, you get into the 70s is psychological, and I think that's what I fear.
Now, you're a business owner. You own a wine shop here in the city of Plattsburgh. This time of year, is it slow business anyway, even with Canadians?
It is. It'd be difficult to tell this time, be more telling what happens in May. There's just not that many Canadians who will come, and you might as well just brave the cold in Montreal than brave the cold in Plattsburgh.
Although if you go to places like maybe Messina or Ogdensburg that are literally across the border, right, just a couple of miles across the border, some of the restaurants and businesses there say they're seeing the impact. Not as many people crossing the border to eat or shop right now, and they're seeing it.
That makes sense.
The Target store at Champlain Center in Plattsburgh is probably hoping that it's going to see Canadian customers come back. I mean, when it first opened several years ago, lots of Canadians were flocking across the border to shop there. But then Target slowly has been opening stores in Canada for the past couple of years, opening them in Montreal, Candiac on Highway 15, heading up to Montreal. But Target announcing a couple of weeks ago that they're closing every store they own in Canada. They just couldn't make a go of it, I guess.
Pulling right out, and Walmart had a kind of a rocky start in Canada as well. They stuck to it, and now they're a real presence. But Target had that same experience, just didn't have the growth that they would expect in floor sales. And Canada's a little bit more of a fickle market than the U.S. is, and not quite so competitive. Even the Walmarts and the Targets in Canada don't have the same sort of competitive advantage they seem to have here. They still try to price up a little bit higher in the spectrum.
And they don't always carry the same merchandise as the store down here. And they said the company said it lost $1 billion in its first year in Canada, and I guess never was able to recover from that. So closing all 133 stores, about 17,000 workers.
And of course, RadioShack's doing the same thing down south of the border here now.
Making news this week, about 4,500. They closed about 1,000 stores a year ago, but still 4,500 stores across America. Every little small town, it seems, as we grew up, had a RadioShack. But they've run into tough times. Probably Walmart competition, Amazon, and others has made it tough for them. They've been losing a lot of money over the past few years, and has it gotten to the point where it's just going to be impossible for them to avoid bankruptcy? Are there any last-minute bidders or anyone who may come in and help them out?
Well, if you've been into a RadioShack, they've really had to reinvent themselves. The kids just don't play with transistors and diodes like we did at one time, and so now they're more of a cell phone outlet kind of a store. And the same sort of electronics that you can just get a little bit cheaper just out on the other end of the mall at Walmart, say. So they are trying to reinvent themselves over the last few years. It looks like Sprint will probably buy out about half their stores to become the main outlet for Sprint. The issue is what happens with the other half of the stores, where there'll be some sort of buyer, whether they'll close that up. They're also having creditor problems. I think I read that they've been or on the verge of defaulting on some debt and maybe becoming delisted. So they're really going through some pain.
Yeah, the New York Stock Exchange, I think, delisted them midweek once they were trading below I think 25 cents a share or something. So that's not a good sign if you're this deep into it. Sprint probably would move into stores, I would imagine, in larger markets, obviously, and also where they cover across the country. Probably the small stores, especially in rural upstate New York, where Sprint may not have as good a coverage, probably are doomed.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Sprint just doesn't have that same sort of coverage. They're not going to lead the coverage based on where they can get the storefronts, obviously. They have to go where the customers are, and with our RadioShack, a foot in the door allowed them to do it a lot cheaper. So.
One of the big stories this week, the president rolled out his budget. Literally, there's always that shot where they roll the giant budget books to Capitol Hill, and $4 trillion budget plan. In his State of the Union address, the president talked about his plan to make college free, community college free for millions of students. That received kind of a cool reception. Republicans saying it has a price tag anywhere from $60 to $80 billion. Plus, I guess the states would have to pick up a certain percentage of the cost. Does that doom it right there? Is it unlikely that that's going to get through the House and Senate, now both controlled by Republicans?
I think it probably is doomed. He wanted to fund it through a one-time increase in some international taxes from companies that tried to keep some of their earnings overseas. I think it's a good idea, and it is qualified. He didn't say, we'll let Johnny or Jill go to school for a couple of years at community college and study whatever they want. I think he was targeting certain areas where there's a workforce shortage. And I was looking at watching Canadian television the other night and saw an ad in Canada where the government's right behind creating a million new apprentices for these emerging jobs. And this, to me, President Obama was trying to do is that same sort of vein, is let's get ahead of our workforce demands. So it has merit, and other countries are doing it, but it's a tough role. We consider, even though there's a strong public education aspect in the United States, it's still pretty much a free market. And this would have been the biggest foray into that free market, perhaps ever since the GI Bill or the 1960s.
And I know some Republicans would counter that because it's a free market, they thought the community colleges might drive up the prices. If the government's picking up the tab, tuition rates could go up. And they talk about perhaps trying to lower overall costs for more students and not just community college students, to try to bring down the the cost of education. But as you mentioned, one of the things I think made it very tough to try to sell to the Republicans is the tax that you're talking about. This is a one-time tax on profits overseas by American companies.
Right. And again, makes sense if we can come up with some sort of package that would probably require us to become more competitive in the corporate income tax in general. As you know, we've spoken on this show before that Canada recently lowered their corporate income tax about 15%. Now, in reality,
Burger King and Tim Hortons merge and talk about moving to Canada.
That's right, and that's the kind of thing you expect if countries start competing over the income tax. Ireland was very successful in lowering their corporate income tax about 10%. The U.S. really stands alone in having a corporate income tax that has a high of around 38%. In the industrial world, I think there's maybe only one other country that does that. So, but of course, we know that a lot of the more sophisticated companies with lobbyists and tax accountants and lawyers can, find those loopholes. And GE, for instance, I think effectively pays a negative income tax to get money back every year. But we really need a much simpler tax code, so there's not that incentive to game and hide and move money into other countries and that sort of thing.
And that's what you hear again, the Republicans saying, let's talk about revamping the entire tax code, because the president, part of his budget plan also is talking about capital gains tax for wealthiest of Americans and raising that rate from the low 20s to about 28%.
So there's a way where they might find a compromise. So most economists would agree that a high corporate tax, since it's just either a pass-through to the consumers that are going to buy the product, or it's a discouragement to these companies to export because they're going to be competitively at a disadvantage paying 25% higher tax than the companies they're competing with internationally. Lower that tax, but what if we did it in a revenue neutral way? Lower the tax at the corporation level, but then raise the tax on dividends or capital gains. That would solve some of the double taxation kind of a problem. As a matter of fact, most economists would probably say get rid of the corporate tax entirely and then raise the dividend and capital gains tax in a revenue neutral kind of way. It would turn out to be a lot more efficient.
And the president wants to use some of that money from the raising the capital gains tax to finance a tax break for millions of lower and middle income families in the U.S.
So he's getting clever about it. It's very complicated. And he says, I'll kind of give you this here, but I want to take this over here. So that's good place for a compromise and get a deal done.
It sounds though on Capitol Hill that there isn't much mood for compromise when it comes to any talk of taxes on the part of the Republicans. Do you think there will be some agreement on infrastructure, though? The president talking about $500 billion over 6 years to repair roads and bridges and mass transit. Do you think that there will be at least compromise and agreement on that needs to be something that's done?
I'm afraid not. It's ironic that we're talking about this now because about 6 or 7 years ago, when we were just going into the Great Recession, that was exactly the types of things we were talking about at this table is necessary to do. And that number, $400 to $600 billion, would have probably been sufficient to avert the Great Recession. Now that we're over the Great Recession, we're still revisiting that. I mean, the idea still makes sense. There's very little inflationary pressure out there. The true unemployment rate is probably a little bit higher than it appears to be because so many people withdrawn from the labor force. We need to reinvent our labor force, the structural changes we're going to need to do. So that could be still a good vehicle to do it if spread out enough so it's not inflationary. And of course, we all know that that Society for American Structural Engineers gives us a D- grade for our quality of our bridges in this country. What a perfect opportunity. Combine that with a little bit of movement towards more alternative energies and mass transit, and it might be just the stimulus we need not to get ourselves out of the recession, because it looks like we're finally clawing our way out of that, but to really transition us into the next economy.
Looking ahead now for the governor's budget in New York State, he's proposing a few tax cuts of his own. One would be for homeowners who pay more than 6% of their income in property taxes. It'd be a circuit breaker type plan where they would, I guess, average about $1,000 back for well over 1 million homeowners in New York. Is that going to be a tough sell in the legislature? A number of lawmakers think that maybe there ought to be other ways to reduce taxes, and that this may not be the answer at a cost of $1.7 billion.
Right, it'd be very interesting to look at the distributional effects of it. It could be that this is something that would really benefit a lot of working class families, which we obviously want to help, but living in Westchester County or down towards the 5 boroughs. I think the better argument that I'm hearing from upstate is how do we take that $1.7 billion and spread it across the state in relief for all kinds of people that are really hurting right now. And this seems to me to not only probably not manage to succeed in spending that $1.5 trillion ultimately, but it just seems just a little bit gimmicky.
The one thing that seems to be embraced a little more by lawmakers and others upstate is the proposal for $1 billion to help fill in the gaps for broadband across both the Adirondack Park and the North Country. Half of that would be from the state, the other half would be from the private companies that would create the network. Aside from issues with the APA within the park, is there optimism, you think, that this could be a step that would help the North Country?
I think it could. I'm not sure if $1 billion, even if it's 50-50 public-private match, would do it. But there is a new technology coming on, a very fast version of DSL. Now, of course, there's copper line going just about every house. So if we can get literally a gigabit DSL going, and this would require about probably 4 times as many DSL little stations along the road where they can feed a few houses at a time, kind of like that transformer that you see mounted on poles, and then maybe run all those to fiber. That might be an inexpensive way, because that last little mile or even that last 100 feet is really what's expensive. So with a combination of technology and maybe a little bit of regulatory reform, because a lot of the DSL providers, the copper wire providers, are these old telephone companies that are just struggling to get by, highly regulated. So if we have a little bit of modification in the way we oversee the telephone industry, combine that with some new technologies, I think that's pretty exciting. And
you wouldn't have the need for the towers, which of course could still be an issue in the Adirondack Park, although the APA has certainly been in recent years approving more and more towers, but that would certainly eliminate that issue anyway. The governor talking about raising the minimum wage again, $10.50 statewide, $1 higher in New York City. Is there an appetite for that, right on the heels of the last increase just a year ago?
You know, that scares me. I still maintain that it's just not as targeted a tool to help that working class family that we're all concerned about. I think that more using an expanded earned income tax credit or some other mechanism to make sure the families that really need it get it. For instance, with the minimum wage, what that would probably mean for a college like SUNY Plattsburgh is they just can't hire as many student workers. There's only a fixed budget, so you increase the wage by 20%, you have to contract the amount of students you employ by 20%. So I've got concerns. I understand philosophically why they're doing it, but I think there's better ways to accomplish it. However, symbolically, I mean, that's what it is, politics, and upping that minimum wage really caters to some groups.
Now, you mentioned SUNY Plattsburgh. The Chancellor, Nancy Zimpher, out with a bold plan, a bold initiative. Her State of the University address trying to raise the graduation rate from $93,000 a year to $150,000 within 5 years by 2020. Obviously, she's talking about the need to improve the percentage of college graduates and to make them better prepared for the jobs out there. But that's quite a lofty goal to try to reach within 5 years.
It is. There is some low-hanging fruit in that a lot of students will take 6 years to get a 4-year degree. So aligning your curriculum up a little bit better so students can actually get through, counseling them better when they come in.
And part of her proposal, putting counselors in every school district in the state,
in the high schools,
help them both academically, but also to know their options for financial aid, to help prepare them financially to take on that burden.
Right, but one of the challenges, though, is we have some low-hanging fruit, but we've got some real big challenges in that the high school cohorts are getting smaller and smaller. We're seeing the community colleges really suffering because just not that many students graduate from high school as there were 10 years ago. So you're not going to reverse that trend very quickly at all. It's quite a challenging task.
She kept alluding to the fact that it was going to take more of an investment, but we haven't heard any numbers on what it would require from the state as far as additional money. She's talked about the private communities around the SUNY campuses raising private donations to help the campuses and help the students, but no firm price tag of what this could cost to try to raise the graduation rate so dramatically like that.
Right, but I do applaud her vision, and our chancellor certainly has an awful lot of vision, so that's wonderful.
Education is obviously also a big topic in Albany. The governor vowing $1 billion more in education money, but
with strings.
With strings attached, and a lot of those strings are very controversial with the teachers' unions and many lawmakers requiring the teachers, revamping the teachers' evaluation, taking steps that many believe or that the governor says will help make it easier to get failing teachers out of the classroom. Tenure goes from 3 years to 5 years. Very controversial, and likely to be one of the more controversial proposals probably that the governor's made.
Right, and he's certainly also taking on the education establishment by talking more about charter schools. Something
100 additional charter schools, up to like 500 and some now from the 400 that they're calling for or allowing in the state.
So it should be interesting. This governor does an awful lot of things with using a carrot and stick approach, but often it's more of the stick side of the carrot and stick approach, like the property tax cap, for instance. The penalties for not going along with it can be loss of $1 billion of additional resources in education, or loss of rebate checks for taxpayers. And
the unknown this year is what's going to get accomplished in the legislature, because just a day after his State of the State and budget address, the combo address, Sheldon Silver is arrested, facing federal corruption charges. He has stepped down, resigned as the Assembly Speaker, remaining as an assemblyman for now, as saying that he'll be vindicated in his mind.
Just today,
a new Assembly Speaker voted in, Carl Heastie from New York City. Talk from Cuomo about tough new ethics reforms to go this session. So
haven't we heard that already?
We have in the past, and they haven't really gone anywhere. And so the question is, does that become a huge distraction or priority that now a number of these budget proposals may not get addressed?
And of course, we lost a whole month in the whole legislative cycle too, because of all the Sheldon Silver stuff. So you're really trying to do everything from now to April, and there's an awful lot on their plate and a lot of controversial items.
And they have passed the budget on time for the past 4 years now, after a number of years of not meeting that goal. Of course, the question is, and one of the complaints about Albany is that for so many years it's been the backroom dealings, it's been the three men in the room that get the budget deal hammered out in many of the major pieces of legislation, and now one of those longtime players is gone. So probably a lot of question about how that's going to play out. We talked with Mayor Jim Calnon. He stopped by a couple of weeks ago and sat down to talk about some of the things happening in the city of Plattsburgh. Of course, you're on the town of Plattsburgh, the Clinton County legislature representing the town of Plattsburgh. And the city has taken steps now with a Montreal company to move ahead to operate a new marina down on the waterfront. I guess the mayor and others thinking that they're hoping to entice more Canadians down to maybe spend a day or two and dock there and spend time in the downtown. Perhaps a day here and a day in Burlington, but maybe draw in some more Canadians.
That's right. That original NAV Tours proposal has been modified a little bit to really have a little bit more of a public and private partnership in there, and serving food and having a pathway of people to come up into the downtown. That sort of thing is pretty exciting. Certainly, I've said before, the downtown of Plattsburgh, with a combination of its history and the funky shops and the restaurants, really is our tourism engine from which we can all attach and try and derive things for each municipality within the county. So I really applaud what they're trying to do. They're making progress on, they just recently appointed somebody's going to help with the events coordinating.
Special events coordinator.
Working still on the Community Economic Development Office. So,
and it looks like the city is moving ahead, looking at potentially developing the Durkee Street area, that big parking lot near the farmers market. Perhaps talk of a parking garage and trying to create something there of almost like a downtown center.
Right. I think they're going to do a study of that. I guess I still believe that if we're going to have a parking lot, I'd like to see us really celebrate the river in different ways, but people do believe that parking is an issue. You have 1,000 people coming in for a Strand event, certain times there's just not going to be that kind of parking available. So we do need some sort of solution, and of course that beautiful area around Bridge and Durkee Street really has been underutilized for an awful long time.
And there has been talk of connecting with the river, both the Saranac River Trail, perhaps having some sort of a whitewater rafting, man-made rapids to try to bring paddlers to the river there, and other plans. We did hear, and I know you're with the Downtown Association, we did hear that there was also the talk a few months back about looking at the downtown, and do you try to do what Burlington's done with Church Street? And has that progressed anymore, or is that something that really hasn't advanced much as far as the downtown merchants and others thinking that that might be something to take a serious look at?
I think perhaps at some time, but I think we need just the right mix of shops and entrepreneurial spirit down there to make that happen. One thing we are going to start working on is to see if we can do more things on Sundays, for instance, and come up with an incentive or a list of businesses that are willing to be open on Sundays to attract tourists. If we can create that groundswell, I think it's a lot easier to make the case then for some sort of a main shopping district like Church Street. But if we don't build that interest up in advance, and we invested in something like a Church Street and it fails, it's just going to be a terrible white elephant, and nobody's going to want to go towards that concept for another 2 or 3 generations. So you really have to do it right.
The town and the city are working together with the county, looking at the beach area, City Beach, and developing that. And is that really the crown jewel that many people see, that might be developing that? A number of proposals talked about there was an event held this past summer to bring in people to solicit ideas from them, but is developing that where there may be restaurants or a pier or an amphitheater, and maybe finding other uses for the Crate Civic Center, is that still probably one of the big plans that collectively everyone may be looking at first and thinking that may be the best means for economic development?
You know, it's hard to say. We don't have, for instance, in Burlington right now, there's a developer who's willing to just write a check for $200 million for some big grand idea down near Church Street. We don't have that private money on the sidelines, just says we're going to just pump X amount of dollars and just make this happen. So we do an awful lot of planning and studies and that sort of thing. I'd like to see us all get together and really all of us get behind something and keep moving it forward rather than talking about it constantly. You know, we do have that destination master plan. We are reconvening another session
Chambers
of that.
talked about basically using the region's history to create an attraction there.
And you'll hear more about that in the springtime. Mr. Harvey, who is the person who helped write that plan for us a few years ago, will be coming back. But it requires some sort of unique mix of entrepreneurship, maybe a little bit of public incentive, public-private partnerships. But you got to really solve that chicken and the egg problem. And if we don't really have a track record of, in the last couple of generations, pulling in 10,000 people at a time, entrepreneurs are kind of reluctant because they're not quite confident that the public side of the public-private partnership is going to proceed.
You are seeing a new era, though, of cooperation between the town and the county and the city, probably more so than ever before, where everyone's identifying that collectively, whether it's sharing of services or looking collectively at economic development, that's the way to go.
Right, and you're also seeing vision, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, talking about vision might have been considered foolhardy, but now vision is considered actually a good thing. And we're seeing a little bit of excitement being generated and positivism about our region being generated. And I think that's the very first ingredient. Without that, none of this would work. So, I'm very, very happy with the way things are starting to proceed.
Colin Read, thanks a lot for taking the time to be with us.
You bet. Thank you.